awesome ahri has been one of my dream cosplays to make ever since it was released, and as I would be attending PAX East this year, I decided it was finally time to make the costume, especially as I believed that my cosplay skills were finally up to scratch to recreate it. I started this project off by making the corset. This part of ahri's design is very clearly inspired by an obi, but should not be made like one as it cinches into her waist so much, therefore not being an obi, and should be made as a waspy corset instead. I make all my waspies using the same pattern. I developed this pattern myself and it is perfectly made for my body. For my materials, I used a Duchess satin for my fashion layer, and for my structured layer, I used a calico. On my fashion layer, I top stitched all of my seams down to keep them clean. I ended up doing some really thick bindings, and I have no clue why, but slip stitched them down, which is my go-to finish stitch for this style of garment. For the teal band detail, I cut the band and then directly stitched it onto the corset. I did this so it would contour to my body correctly, and so I didn't have to mess around with multiple layers. When stitching the band on, part of it needed to be hand cranked on the machine, so I did not break a needle on any of the bones inside of the corset. I then made my bows to go onto the corset piece. I only filmed making the teal bows as I was so pressed for time when making this cosplay, but I made them as loops with rolled hems so I would have an open style of bow.
Over here. Sophie. And I eat there now. Here is my dining room. You can see more of a coffee shop vibe here because there is like stuff on the walls, which I don't know, maybe a coffee shop is not that big. I'm just gonna call it my coffee shop actually. So we already know that the chairs, we know that the table, all thrifted. I really like these chairs. I really like the chairs next to a table. And then I have my paperwork and my last place as well. This is where all my toy supplies, my knitting supplies,
I then patterned out all of the applique sections for the sleeves. Big pattern guides like this are super helpful for working out what you're cutting and placing where. For the big part of the sleeve, I decided to split it into a big white section and a smaller teal section at the bottom. I did this mostly to get the most out of my fabrics, but also to help reduce the weight in the sleeve as it was going to have so much applique added to it. I then patterned my bodice using my favorite bodice block. I adapted this to have a crossover section in the front. Once sewn together, I added boning channels. The most important boning channel being in the center back, as this helps the garment to stay upright and not slouch in the back. Strapless garments tend to do this without the support, so it was very important to have the boning channel here. When making this section, I was actually just doing a twirl to make sure that all my patterns fit, but as you can see, I managed to get a perfect fit the first time, so I ended up using this as the lining in my final garment. I then moved on to making my fake underlayer. Ahri's design makes it look like she is wearing a blue layer under the white, but I don't want the bulk of wearing 2 layers, so I made a strip I could attach to the hemline and give a faux 2-layer look. For Ahri's shoes, I already had the perfect base shoe from when I made Kokomi shoes. I decided to use non-permanent reversible changes to make it suitable for Ahri. I did this by first removing the elements that made these Kokomi shoes, such as the vinyl pattern and the bows on the shoes. To make the shoes black, instead of painting, I added vinyl, which will be easier to remove if I want to change the color of the shoe in the future. I used a heat gun with very low heat to help curve it around the shoe smoothly. I then wrapped pink cord around the thong, which can be removed for different styles in the future. After I finished making the shoes, I then created my appliques for the sleeves. I decided to make every applique as a backed out piece. I made every piece backed out so it was nice and clean and easy to sew on, and I could also strategically either cover or catch the openings of each piece in a seam so that there were no raw edges. After the applique was done, I moved on to the big task of creating all 9 tails. I created a boned plate that would sit on my back to support each tail, borrowing ideas from corsetry to give the support for this piece. Each of the tails was made from some scrap fabric I had in my stash. I decided to create each tail like this so that a fur color could easily be put over the structure, as this would allow me in the future to easily change between different furs as I plan to make more ahri cosplays. Once I had sewn each case, I added polyfill only to the base of the tail to make it nice and full. I then inserted a cardboard tube into the top of each tail. This would act similarly to a bone when placed against my body on the plate that I had created. I then moved on to cutting each tail out of the faux fur. This blue fur sheds so much that I am still finding remnants of it in my house many months later. Once I had sewn up and bagged out all of the fur tails, it was time to put them over the bases I had created. I just did this by stuffing the base tail into the fur casing that I had created for it. On many of the tails, I had to hand sew the top bit together just because it was too difficult to get the tail where it was this narrow over the tube. Once each tail was made, I then sewed it onto the plate that would sit against my back. I would later on add straps onto the plate so that it could be securely and safely fastened around myself, and I would hide this strap system with the corset. The last thing I had chance to record was the start of making the ears. I didn't record much after this because it was very close to having to catch a flight, but basically the ear base is made from some warbler and then I just glue faux fur over it. I would have loved to record more construction footage. I'm so happy with how this cosplay turned out, and I'm really happy I finally managed to make one of my dream League of Legends cosplays. I plan to add a little bit more detail to the costume and hopefully complete my goal of recreating the splash art for this costume.